In the early years of the second millennium, Leif Erikson settled in North America, decided it was a bit underwhelming, and came back. We hope he at least brought some souvenirs. Meanwhile, a Frenchman conquered England, leaving a lasting mark on the history of Britain and wider Europe. And in China, a man is watching noodles dry. These noodles and their toppings are the next step in our journey, where we trace the steps from the earliest Chinese noodles to a modern bowl of ramen. The road to ramen. Last episode we saw the origins of Chinese noodles which used millet. Then we jumped a few thousand years to the Han Dynasty and saw the first use of wheat in noodles. Today we make another jump of almost 1000 years, straight to the Song Dynasty, and more specifically to the city of Kaifeng, or as it was known back then, Dongjing. It was around this time that we start seeing mention of the tradition to eat long noodles for one's birthday. There was even a story where an impoverished nobleman traded his sleeves for flour to make birthday noodles for the emperor, this being the only instance of a sleeve-based currency that we know of. Poems from this period tell us about how the length of noodles is symbolic of longevity. Short noodles might be a side effect of not getting the emperor noodles for his birthday. Why are we focusing on Dongjing? It's here that we see the emergence of a culture of noodle shops. Under the Northern Song, curfews were relaxed and we started seeing the emergence of genuine nightlife, with noodle shops staying open throughout the night. We know this from a very good source written by a refugee living under the Southern Song, writing about his old home after it had fallen to the Mongols. They reminisce in great detail, telling us about the shouting of waiters to the kitchen and how one had to order at noodle stalls. When looking at the history of ramen, this paints an awfully familiar picture. This work is called Dreams of Splendor of the Eastern Capital. The name, Eastern Capital, is still in use today by a different city, Tokyo. Coincidence? We'll let you decide. So, what was in these bowls? There was broth, which we made in a different video, toppings, to which we will get in the second part of this video, and the actual dough strands, which is where we'll start. In this era, many different types of noodles were being eaten in China. They were still often called tang bing, however, a new catch-all term for all things noodle was on the rise: mian, the word that today still means noodle in Mandarin. The noodle that became mainstream in this period is the one that today is called guamian, translated noodles that are hung, to dry. This makes perfect sense in a historical context. With the rise of noodle shops and the general commercialization, it makes sense that a method that allowed noodles to be made in bulk and preserved for a couple of days became more popular. In addition, we found poetry from the Song period which describes the scene of a celebration banquet, where guests were served bowls of noodles resembling fine strands of silver. So from that we are concluding that they were fine and contained only wheat, water and salt, no eggs or alkali, as this would turn them yellow. And any good poet would describe that as gold. We will get to the golden noodles later in this series though. Make sure you subscribe for that so you don't miss it. For these noodles we know that the noodles were long, they were fine, they were white and they were hung to dry. For the method on how to make the noodles we did not find a source from the Song dynasty, but got one from a little bit later in the Yuan dynasty, from a statesman and painter called Ni Zan, who wrote a book called Cloud Forest Hall Collection of Rules for Drinking and Eating. He doesn't provide amounts, so we added these ourselves. Add a pinch of salt to 150 milliliters of water. Then add the water to 300 grams of plain white flour, giving us a hydration of around 50%. Feel free to add tiny amounts of water by way of damp hands if you still have dry patches. Mix all of it and then knead 20 times. Yes, 20 times. That's what the rules of Cloud Forest Hall say. Don't look at me. After kneading, wrap it in cloth. We are using a clean tea towel. Then let it rest for about 15 minutes. Repeat this process 4 times. After doing the 4 sets of kneading, we are rolling it out with a rolling pin. We have to get it fine, that's the most important bit. We've cut ours in smaller sheets to make it more workable. To keep these sheets from sticking, we are using rice flour. Now it is time for cutting. The recipe only says that they should be cut. It does not provide a shape or technique, so we are going to use our own experience from making pasta here and cut them into tagliatelle-like ribbons, which we think is very fitting as this is also the period in which Marco Polo visited these lands. Once cut, we're going to hang them up on our rack, which isn't as impressive as the drying solution usually used for these types of noodles, but it will work for us. Once dried, gently remove and store in a dry container. Some will snap, that's fine. If all of this is too much effort for you, there is another way. You can just buy these. In all fairness, this is just salt water and flour. There is probably no real discernible difference between store-bought dried noodles and these. Admittedly, the noodles from 1000 years ago probably weren't as smooth or white. If you do make them yourself, remember that your drying solution probably isn't as efficient as the industrial one, and yours will only last about 5 days. Oh, don't act like that. I would have still had you make them from scratch, whether we had led with this or not. Now that we have our noodles, it is time for the next element, the toppings. Now, there was a great variety of food available in Song Dynasty China. However, this is still road to ramen, so we're going to narrow this down to something that could have been a precursor to modern ramen toppings. Here we have a normal, fairly standard bowl of ramen. No, that's over here. Now, there are loads of toppings which you might regard as staples, like the egg, no, over here, and the nori sheet. But in Japan, a lot of these are actually paid extras. One thing, however, that is intrinsically linked with ramen is the chasu, the pork. So for our medieval Chinese noodles, we are going to need medieval Chinese pork. And when it comes to pork, China, under the Song, got poetic. Song Dynasty poet and statesman Su Dongpo, also known as Su Qi, wrote an ode to pork during his time in Guangzhou, away from the imperial capital. This poem was so influential that a lot of Chinese restaurants will still name a pork dish after him. The poem goes as follows. Is the lady ready? Yes.
净洗汤
Clean your pot.
少焯水
Use a little bit of water.
柴头掩烟焰不起
Use small amounts of grass and wood to maintain gentle smoldering embers.
待它自熟莫催它
Don't rush. Let it stew by itself.
火候足时它自美
It will become beautiful on its own once it is done.
黄州好猪肉
Guangzhou has great pork.
价贱如泥土
It is cheap as mud.
贵者不肯吃
The rich will not eat it.
贫者不解煮
The poor do not understand how to make it.
早晨起来打2碗
I have 2 bowls of it when I wake up in the morning.
饱得自家君莫管
I am satiated. Leave me be. Okay, maybe this wasn't the best approach. It's a lot of steps to just make slowly boiled pork. You could have included some seasonings. There is another method. Ming Dynasty scholar Han Yi wrote a cookbook called Yi Ya's Lost Wishes, or Yi Ya's Lost Methods. Yi Ya being a legendary, almost mythical Chinese cook who lived way before the Song Dynasty. So we're not cheating really. Although this is a cookbook and not a poem, it is still written in a very poetic way. It starts with a description of the meat. Take a tender piece of pork, half lean, half fat. We're going to take that this means pork belly. Cut into die-sized pieces. Problem? I see. Go for the D6 there. A D12 would be barbaric. Cook with half water and wine. The recipe tells us not to use too much, so we're going to make sure the bits are just covered. It also does not specify whether we're starting from cold or warm, so we are starting from cold. Now leave it on the hob. Once it comes to a boil, take it over the heat after 1 minute of boiling. Take out the pork and set aside. Keep the blanching liquid. With this set aside, we're going to take a spoonful of lard and beat this soft in a mortar. This is no cholesterol-friendly cooking. Mash the lard and mix it with the sauce. Well, the recipe just says the sauce and doesn't specify anything else, so we are going to gratefully fill those gaps with nice things. We are going to use a mixture of dark and light soy sauces and fish sauce. Then add in what the recipe calls the sands of fragrant peppercorns. We are going to take that this means freshly ground red and green Szechuan peppercorns. Now mix this with the beaten lard. Once everything is prepared, put it in a pot and bring it up to temperature so the lard melts. Then add the meat back to the pot. Now add the blanching liquid. Han Yi, or is it Yi Ya, tells us not to use too much wine and water, presumably so it can reduce. At this point we're supposed to season to taste. The recipe reminds us not to use the green part of the spring onion. This is fair enough, so we're adding some spring onion whites and some extra soy sauce to taste. Once reduced, we are going to thicken our sauce, as per the recipe's instructions with mung bean powder. Once thickened, get the meat out of the pot. And this will be the final element of our noodle soup. Prepare your bowl, starting with some freshly boiled dried noodles. Ladle over the broth, which we made in our other video. Remember to boil and season with salt before use. Then we are adding our freshly stewed Yi Ya pork with some of its liquid. Finally, we are topping it off with some blanched pak choy for color and nutrition. Add some extra soy sauce if you want. Now imagine you're in a late-night noodle shop in Kaifeng during the splendor of the golden years of the Song dynasty and enjoy your medieval precursor to ramen. Our human found these surprisingly good, and we really do recommend you try these for yourself. Thank you very much for watching. In the next episode, our human will meet his biggest challenge yet, Lanzhou pulled noodles. Please subscribe if you don't want to miss that, and if you like the video, please leave a like. It really means the world for us if you do. See you in the next one.